Why do we think that we're not able to achieve or accomplish these things that are in front of us? Whether it's a mountain of work, being an entrepreneur, closing deals, getting people to listen to you, whatever that obstacle is, I am saying that there is evidence that this has to do with your subconscious mind and that there are ways to be able to retrain this and be able to get you to the places that you want. Have you ever wondered why you do the things that you do? Why you make the choices? Why when a certain instance, somebody talks to you in a certain way, you react a certain way? Maybe it's when you get home and you're just like burnt out and you're like, man, I gotta have a beer. Where are all these things coming from? I mean, is this a conscious choice or is this really a subconscious choice? And this is what I want to talk about over the next 4-part series. I want to talk about the subconscious. I'm fascinated by the subconscious. It's amazing to me how powerful the subconscious is. And I don't think I really understood that. And well, I would say in 2020 was the first realization that there's more to my brain than just these thoughts that are going through my head. What are these natural reactions? Why do we do the things that we do? Why is it so important for us to clearly understand this? Because if you don't, I don't think you're ever going to be able to make the improvements that you want to make to either achieve your goals or get the success you want. If you can't become more self-aware of that, there's more than your conscious brain, working up in there, making the calls, making the shots. Like, think about this. What is a subconscious mind? Where does it exist? How does it actually control the actions that you do? So we're going to go into a 4-part series. We're going to talk about this. We're going to dive into it. We're going to get a better understanding of what this is. And then I'm going to give you some things to think about, some things that I've reflected on to try to understand why I do the things that I do that don't even make sense sometimes. So let's get into it. Do you ever wonder why you just do certain things the same way? So think about this. So could it be possible, because there's studies that have been done, that they say that 95% of the things that you normally do, let's say, driving, or maybe it's the way that you react to a specific thing. Maybe it's something that you just do unconsciously and people are like, why do you do that? Why do you have this, saying that you say, or, why do you react the way that you react? And I think a lot of it has to do with this programming that goes on in your subconscious. I think it's really calling the shots all the time. I think you know what's going on, but I think when certain things happen to you, I think your subconscious is absolutely trained in reacting a certain way. And what ends up happening is that you kind of sit here and go, well, I don't know why I did that. Why do you get defensive? Why are there days when you walk in and maybe you're in a situation, where you're going to a public place and it just doesn't quite feel right. So a lot of people say, well, is that an intuition? What is that? What is that? Could it be that your subconscious mind, right, which is designed to keep you safe, like can scan the room, right, and take in the information and understand that this might not be a good situation for you to be in? I mean, think about that. And a lot of it, too, is about, all right, so the initial reactions. I mean, I don't know how many times I've been in a situation where, something has happened to me and I can't tell you why I reacted. Maybe when I'm driving and something happened. And I remember this one time when I was taking my son to a basketball camp in Las Vegas, and the craziest thing happened to me. I was driving on the freeway and the car in front of me, absolutely nuts, right, just drove off the road and literally rolled over. And all this debris just popped in, and I was literally talking to my wife on the phone and said, holy you know what, and somehow navigated, through all of this debris, and not one of that piece of debris actually hit our vehicle, or I didn't slam on the brakes or do something unsafe. What is that? Where did that reaction come from? It wasn't like I was like, oh my gosh, I know this is coming. So, let me do this, let me do that. I mean, those are the types of things that I'm talking about. Why does the subconscious have so much power over us? Right. And I think it's something that we all need to really think about because, as I've talked about in previous episodes, whether it's goal setting, mental toughness, or, just habit forming things, that just tells me that you have the ability to program that subconscious mind, right, to help you do the things that you need to do. I was listening to a reel, I can't remember who it was, but they were talking about signal and noise. And they were talking about, what is signal and what is noise, right? And you're talking about the focus of, what's important and how to get things dialed in. And you hear a lot of people talk about like we got to focus on the signal and not the noise. And the noise might just be all the clutter of the day and so on and so forth. But I believe that if you dial in your subconscious mind, right, and you discipline it, right, going back to the things of like, all this training, that people go through and talk about good habits and why it takes so long is because your subconscious brain has the ability to be trained, right? That is what you're instilling in that mindset in the back. And some of these things might have shown up in past, call it past trauma, things that happened in your childhood, traumatic experiences, right? Maybe you went out and we're in the ocean and you had a very scary situation. What holds you back, from continuing to do those things, right? It shows you that there's something more to our brains than, just what normally goes through our head on a daily basis, right? So those are things that are absolutely positively real. I've experienced this. I've seen it. There's a lot of people who talk about this, and we're going to dive into that in these future episodes because I want to kind of get down to the nitty-gritty. And we're going to talk about studies that have been done. We're going to be talking about, personal experiences. I'm going to tell some stories, right? Because I think it's important for us to really start thinking through this. And when we face challenges and we go, well, why are we set back? Why do we think that we're not able to achieve or accomplish these things that are in front of us? Whether it's a mountain of work, whether it's, being an entrepreneur, closing deals, getting people to listen to you, whatever that obstacle is, I am saying that there is evidence that this has to do with your subconscious mind and that there are ways to be able to retrain this and be able to get you to the places that you want. And here's the thing that's really interesting about the subconscious mind, and I want to dive into this in this next segment, is that once something is there, this is my personal belief because I've experienced it, it always stays there. And it's the weirdest thing. So like if you get into this rotation of let's use the example I used early on when I opened. Somebody's got a stressful day and they want to have a beer or they want to have a glass of wine or they want to enjoy a bourbon, whatever that is, right? I mean, that's a common thing. And what ends up happening is that let's say they develop a habit that says, you know what, that's not the way to deal with stress. That's not the way I want to deal with stress. That's something that I want to change. And they go through the work of being able to make that adjustment. But what's interesting is that thought process, that type of thinking, it's still there. So a lot of people go, well, man, I don't understand it. I thought I reprogrammed this out of my subconscious brain, right? I developed a discipline and a habit. But at some point, even though, call it rewiring, whatever the terminology you want to use, if you fall back into that, your subconscious brain automatically just reinstitutes whatever that feeling you get, whatever that rush you get, whatever that emotion you get, or that desire that you get, because it's stuck in your brain. So I'm not entirely sure that you can always erase all of these bad habits, but you can become aware of it. And the more and more that you understand that you have to be disciplined, right? And making sure that if you, quote unquote, rewire your subconscious or teach it something new, that the things that are old are still there. I don't think you can necessarily unlearn it. Now, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm just going from experience. It's amazing to watch people do things and get really, really good for a little while, get really, really disciplined, and they're off to a great start. And all of a sudden, they revert back. So what happened? What happened? And this is some of the stuff that we're going to talk about in these upcoming segments in these series of shows, because I think it's important for us to really understand, as human beings, as the way that our brains develop. There's a lot of people say that, your brain and your personality and who you are is going to be developed by age 7. Okay. I mean, we can dive into that and see, how much truth there is to that, but that's a pretty strong statement. But there's a lot of people out there that say this. So think about all the things that happen from, time you're born to age 7, and you're going to say that those thoughts that are stuck in your subconscious, right, are going to dictate, a lot of the behaviors that you're going to project. Well, that very well may be true. So as you continue on, right, think about this. So if you have some segment of the way that you are reacting to things, right, in your subconscious, the way that you react, the way you approach, your beliefs, what you can and can't do, right? Oh, because maybe you had somebody in there when you were young that said, hey, you should never start a business because it is absolutely crazy and businesses fail and, you can't do this. People are just, they don't take your phone calls and it's rough. You get a lot of rejection, right? What if that just like culminates in your brain and you kind of grow up with that belief system, right? It's always going to be there. So, maybe it's different. Maybe somebody who, by their 7th year had somebody telling them that, hey, the greatest thing that you could ever do is start a business. You want financial freedom. This is how you do it. You know what? Yeah, you're going to run into, some objections, but so what? You can do that. So could it really be that simple? But regardless, we all have what we have to deal with and how we grew up and what our experiences have dictated to us. So if those are all locked in your subconscious brain, then know this, you can do something about it. I know from personal experience. However, the caveat is that you have to know that whatever's been in there, right? It's not like you're extracting it out. Okay. So if you wind back to your vomit, right? Go back to your vomit, then that vomit's going to come out. And when that vomit comes out, don't be surprised if you fall back into that normal cycle of whatever that behavior is, or however you project something, or what your thoughts are that actually come out of your brain, right? And the way that you react. So the best thing I can say is that don't be so hard on yourself and just understand that this is just going to be a process. The fact that you recognize it, and as soon as you go back to that quote unquote vomit, then just know that you don't want to be there. And then just remember how you got out of it, because that's still there too. So I think all of us should pay attention to this, especially those that are wanting to start a business, make improvements, do things better, build healthier lifestyles, whatever that is to you, whatever that why is to you that you want to accomplish, the goals that you want to achieve, whether it's, hey, I want to be here at a certain time of life. I want to build a business. I want to be able to retire at this age, whatever it is. Everybody has their thing. And I think it's really important to just give it some thought and not go into that cycle of over and over and over again of why you can't do something. Because I'm the first person to tell you that when I started my business, everybody said that I wasn't going to make it. Well, let me take that back. Not everybody. There was a lot of people that said, oh man, it wasn't like, oh, Charles, there was actually one person that said, you're not going to make it. Well, you know what? You prove them wrong, right? I proved them wrong. But there was other people that were like, oh, I don't know. Have you really considered this? Because, business is tough. And, if you go and do this, so they were saying a lot of things, right? They were just putting all this information in. But the crazy thing about it is, for some reason, somewhere in my brain, I had set that goal, right? After the third time I got laid off, that I was going to go and start my own business no matter what by age 30, right? I implanted that into my brain. So in my subconscious, it knew that I needed to continue down this path, whatever it was, everything that I could possibly learn. And when I got to that point, I took the leap. But it was in my brain. I rewired it. I told it, because it was very easy for me to stay where I was because I was making great money. It would have been something really easy to do. But for whatever reason, right? And I know that was the path that I took, and that was the seed that I implanted in my head, and I kept watering it. So I've done that with other things, right? When I wanted to lose 83 pounds, right? I put that in my mind. I knew what needed to get done. But here's the crazy part, right? As soon as I got done with it, and yes, everything kind of maintained, it was very easy to want to go back, right, to all those bad habits, and they were just waiting there. So these are the things that I want to talk about. These are the things that fascinate me, because the more and more I dig into this, the more and more I believe, it doesn't matter who you are, if you can understand this, and you can understand those things that make you do the things that you don't understand, and you know what I'm talking about, because everybody has this moment where they're like, I didn't know why I acted that way, or why am I so scared to do this? Why am I so unwilling? Why am I such a procrastinator when it comes to these things, right? Those are all the questions, that you're going to be asking yourself, and we're going to dive into this. Okay. I'm not going to say that I'm going to have all the answers for you, but what I do think is that if you continue to tune in and look at the upcoming segments and just think about this, do your own homework after we talk about these things and see where it takes you. And this isn't something that has to cost you a ton of money. It doesn't even really need to cost you a lot of money at all. There's a lot of free information out there that you can take and just really think through these things, right? It's called the internet, AI. You can talk through these situations and it can make you wonder. But part of what I want to do is I want to tie a lot of these previous segments in. When you talk about goal setting, and I talked about mental toughness, right? Talked about habits. All of these things come into play when you're working to train your subconscious mind. So if you know someone who needs to hear or watch this, share this episode with them. I always encourage you to subscribe. You can find us on YouTube at Hey Charles Biz, Hey Charles on Apple Podcast and Spotify, Hey Charles 77 on Instagram and TikTok, and Charles Ernst on LinkedIn. See you next time.